Hello and welcome back to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Andrew J. Shasha, supervising editor of features at the Western Journal. I'm joined today by crack reporter Michael Austin.
That's my title.
That is his certain title for our show and for our job. Now, we, for the folks who are not normally with us, or for who are normally with us, you'll notice that we are short a chair today. That is because we are joined today by special guest Lila Rose, the founder and president of Live Action, and the author of the newly released Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. Lila,
hey guys, thanks for having me. This is my hard copy.
Hey,
we got to send you the fancy version, but it's great to be on with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. So for our audience at home who is not familiar with you just yet, or may just be kind of tangentially aware of Live Action and what you guys do, give us a little bit of your intro, the organization's intro, and just what you guys get down to.
I'd love to. So Live Action is the global leader for education for the pro-life movement. That means we're reaching over 15 million people every single week with the pro-life message. So we're sharing the truth about abortion, exposing it, the value of human dignity, advocating for motherhood. And I started it 15 years ago as a teenager. It definitely wasn't the global leader then. It was a small youth organization that I just thought I have to do something about abortion. I felt very convicted and didn't have another youth organization to join in San Jose, California at the time. And so that's the genesis of the organization. And we also do investigative reporting on the abortion industry and lots of activism and activation, particularly of young people.
Yeah, and so, moving on to your book, we both got a chance to read it. It was great. Excellent. By the way. We both enjoyed it quite a bit. Just leading into that, what are some of your goals with this book? What do you hope it achieves?
So the big end game for Live Action is to end abortion and build a culture of life. And this book is a foray into what does it look like to build that culture of life for us as individuals and discovering our calling or a particular cause. So I wanted to write something that would equip people and give them inspiration and guidelines or guidance for how they can get off the sidelines and into some of these most important fights of our day. I think last year, during the pandemic, before the election, I had just had my first child. I'm working on writing this book, and I felt like more than ever, we need people to feel emboldened and really, I think, have the courage to stand up and make their voices heard, because more than ever, there's partisanship in politics. There's these ideologies that are so toxic to the human person. And obviously the abortion industry is leading the biggest one of all, the biggest lie that you can kill a child. And so it just takes good people, everyday people with common sense and goodwill to stand up and say, enough is enough. And so Fighting for Life is that manual of sorts for how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's excellent. So we actually talked about this a little bit before the show. Something that I found so interesting about this book and a couple of more recent books is that people are starting to branch into these kind of more practical guides, less about, where you're using your experience to kind of paint those brushstrokes and to kind of show those step-by-step kind of ways to make change. What is the importance of folks at your level in these movements actually stepping down and saying, hey, this isn't just my experience, but here are the practical steps that you can get involved and you can help us make change, and you can start making, organizations of your own or getting involved in those organizations to really actually drive the movement instead of just sitting back, reading the news and rooting people on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need that. We all need practical steps. And, I do share kind of, you could say, philosophy or theory in the book about, what it means to be human and our identity and the pro-life cause and things like that. But when I was first starting Live Action as a teenager, I wish I'd had a guidebook. I wish someone had said, you're about to get in this really difficult fight. There's going to be so many challenges and obstacles and fears you're going to face in the next 15 years. Here's a guidebook, that'll help you along the way. And, obviously I had different mentors that I sought out, and faith, plays the biggest role of all. And discovering, I'm a daughter of God and trying to live out my faith and all these different pieces. But I basically wrote the book, Fighting for Life, that I wish I had when I was just starting out in building Live Action, because that just gives people confidence to know that there have been paths that have been forged that seemed so impossible or difficult, and it is possible for you, for anyone, to stand up and make a difference. It just requires a willingness to try.
And getting into, when I was reading the book, you got me in the first chapter. I was gripped from the beginning, and it's because you talked about your first life-changing heartbreak. And, that was a really emotional tale, and I think it really kind of shows who you are as a person and how you got what really got you involved in the pro-life movement. So, for our viewers that haven't read the book yet, could you just kind of explain what that first life-changing heartbreak was?
Of course. And that chapter is the first of the book. It's called Let Your Heart Break, because I think any social action, any engagement in a cause that is worth fighting for, it starts with letting your heart be broken for the people that are hurt, for the injustice that's being committed. And that is a fuel. It hurts to hurt. But I think it's so important. And anger is a component of hurt too, because you're angry for what's being done. And for me as a young girl, it was finding out about abortion by coming across this book in my parents' house. They were very pro-life. I'm one of 8 kids, but they weren't pro-life activists in the sense of, going out to abortion clinics or, making that a big part of our upbringing. And so I'd heard about abortion, but I didn't really understand what it was. And I remember looking at, for the first time, the photography that was in this book. It had an insert, and they were photographs of children who were abortion victims. So I was actually looking at, for the first time, a child maybe 10 weeks old in the first trimester, and you could see this newly formed little face, arms, legs, and this child had been torn apart by a powerful first trimester suction abortion, which is the most prevalent abortion in America. And it's 30 to 50 times more powerful than a household vacuum cleaner. So it's as if you're putting this suction tube, you put it into the womb of the mother, and it tears this child limb from torso into pieces, or it sucks the entire child into this waste receptacle. And so looking at this child that had been killed, I could see the baby's humanity, this little 10-week-old embryo, first trimester. It broke my heart. And I just thought, is this real? Is this happening? How can we allow this? I discovered there were 3,000 abortions a day at the time in America. It was legal. It was being done in the name of women's empowerment. And just at a very instinctual level, I knew this is wrong, to take the life of this child. And I felt like I should do something about it. And I was interested in a lot of other causes as I got older. I mean, there's a lot of important causes in the world, whether it's, homelessness or stopping, helping those in poverty, or, helping those that are abuse victims or traffic victims. But I kept coming back to abortion because this was legalized. This was legal slaughter. This was the greatest death toll, and it was done with the full consent of the law. And it was done in the name of women, as if we're benefited by killing our children. And so that was what inspired me to start Live Action, that heartache, and then the education that I was inspired to get after that heartache, that initial heartache, would lead me to start Live Action.
And to kind of piggyback off that, I'm curious, it was kind of a thought that went through my mind. You go back to that a few times throughout the book, and it's very interesting because obviously I would agree with you. These are victims. This is an injustice. This is a crime against humanity, quite frankly. But it's very interesting that you see the same language that kind of the left uses to push its narratives. You talk later on in the book about a friend of yours who kind of grapples with communism and whether or not that's something that they want to pursue. So obviously, heart or emotion is not the only thing to be kind of driving. It's the first step, as you say. But how would you say kind of the weighing of values and kind of discernment play into that? And how would you kind of suggest that people guard themselves against what you talk about at the end of the book, with compassion being manipulated and used to drive you to a cause that is just unacceptable?
Yeah. Yes. And I actually, one of the final chapters in the book is beware false compassion, because we let our hearts break, but then we educate our minds. And in that sense, we're educating our hearts. And in the other chapter you mentioned about communism, and my friend and I, who were, reading Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto and thinking, some of this sounds really good, about treating the worker with dignity. And, there's some positive sounding stuff in there. And we have to become discerning about just causes versus false causes. True compassion versus false compassion. And I talk in the book about how some of the core differentiators, like the telltale signs that something is a false or a just cause is what that cause's view is of the human person. Do they see the human person as made in the image and likeness of God with inherent dignity, with human rights? Or do they dehumanize certain human persons? I mean, with abortion, they dehumanize the preborn child. With eugenics, I talk about eugenics as this false cause. You know, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, loved eugenics. This is what the Nazis loved. The ideology was that certain races or people with certain genetic makeups were less valuable and should not exist because they were a problem for humankind. Today, a false cause is absolutely the idea that women are going to be benefited by having the right to kill our child, right to kill a human life because it has the wrong view of the person. So one of the telltale signs is dehumanization of people. And a lot of false causes are fought in the name of dehumanizing people or relegating people as unimportant, like the environment. It's good to work to care for our environment, our world. But once you start saying we need to not have children or we need to get rid of some of the population for the sake of the environment, you now have a false cause because now you're saying human beings are less valuable than the environment. So it's all about how do you see human beings and what is your moral compass when you're evaluating causes.
And jumping off from that, one more kind of question that kind of brought to mind for me was obviously, in the book and from that conversation that we just had here, I can definitely tell, I think probably most of our viewers can tell that you are driven by your faith. Your faith is instrumental in the work that you do, in the passion that you have, in the care that you have for the unborn. I'm curious as well, as I was reading the book, there are tons and tons of references to scripture and to faith, and it was excellent as a Christian reader, and Michael as well. It's excellent to see that in in the modern conservative movement, that people are really leaning into their faith in that way. I'm curious, though, was it hard for you to decide to put so much of your faith perspective into the book, with the idea of this being a practical guide? Are you worried about the idea that this isn't going to, that it will essentially inhibit pulling in folks who might be willing and kind of sentimental to the cause, but may not be Christians and may be either turned off or just simply, unwilling to make that jump?
It's a really good question. And I did think a lot about, how do I best serve the people that I want to serve with this book, which would be really anybody who, again, feels passionate about a cause and wants to make a difference in the world. But I talk a lot about this in the chapter, Let God Find You, because I wasn't always practicing a Christian faith or even any faith. There was a time where I wasn't sure what I believed. And I took time to really investigate and explore and try to discover what was true. Is God real? Is Christ God? How do I serve him if he is? What does that mean? And I think everybody needs to grapple with these questions. We're all on personal journeys. And I also think that we all put our faith in something. Do we put our faith in science? Is science the ultimate kind of authority or arbiter for us? Do we put our faith in ourselves? Like, are we our moral God? Do we decide morality? Do we put our faith in the government? Does the government, and the school system decide what's right and wrong? Where do we get the final answer on these questions? And I would argue there is a place to find the final answer. It is the true God. But I write the book in a way that respects anybody, no matter where they're coming from. I don't assume you already agree with me. I recommend, what I've done and what I've learned, but ultimately we're each on our journey. And I felt like it would be wrong to not share the whole of my journey. And, the essential piece for me over the years has been discovering the truth about who I am as a daughter of God and the truth about who God is. And that has illuminated so much in my life.
And I think, a lot of the truth about, the horrors of abortion, Live Action has done a really great job of educating people on that. I actually took part in the ambassador program and I went through all those trainings, and that was, there's really, I thought I knew a lot about the movement, but I did not know as much as I thought I did. And I encourage anyone who's interested, check that out. It's a really good program. But, kind of circling back to what I was talking about with that first chapter, with that first heartbreak, what was compelling about it for me was that, you got to see that so young. You're at such a young age when you saw that. And it makes me think that, perhaps if we could somehow get this education, those images, if we could get more young people, of an elementary age to see what the reality of abortion is, that that, we might have to be getting to people a little earlier in their lives. What do you think about that? Do you think that we should be educating, elementary school students, that early on about kind of what the reality of abortion is and what, being pro-life actually means?
Of course. I think that's really hard to do with the existing public school system, but 12-year-olds are having abortions. They're sometimes being sent to abortion clinics by their abusers to have abortions, but and also, the pornification in our culture. I talk a little bit in the book about this and Fighting for Life about this, but why do we have abortion? We have abortion because the sexual revolution happened and sort of uprooted in the mid 20th century our whole moral compass as a culture around sex and love and marriage. And now, we're told that sex is just about consent. It is about consent, but it's about so much more. We're told that sex is about, whatever we want it to be, our pleasure as adults, when sex is designed to create new life and it's designed for lifelong bonding, which is why historically sex has usually been in the context of marriage and family, and that's the best and healthiest way for us to see sex, instead of seeing it as this like thing we do, like this behavior that's just like a momentary sexual pleasure thing. And I think because of that, we have the abortion rate, because we misunderstand sex and we completely sexualize and objectify each other. Porn addictions are at an all-time high, and all of the unhappiness that comes from these unhappy relationships because we don't see sex in the context of marriage and children and family. And so, and by the way, Harvard did an 80-year study on what makes people happy. Harvard University, spent 80 years studying this. What did they find? What makes people happy is committed marriages, lifelong commitment to your spouse. So all this to say, yes, young people absolutely need to be educated. If the school system isn't doing it, and even if they were doing it, it's up to parents. At the end of the day, the parents are the first educators. I think churches need to get more active, and I think we need to be more explicit, especially in evangelical schools and Catholic schools, about the truth about abortion for kids and really explaining sex. Not in terms of a biological function, because that's not really what sex is about. Sex is about relationships. It's about loving, long-term, faithful, exclusive commitment with your spouse. And it's about your relationship with your future children, because that's what sex is designed to create. And so if we instead talk about sex in terms of relationships and love and morality, instead of just this biological function that kids should experiment with, we're going to make a generation a lot happier. And that's how we're also going to get the abortion rate to continue to decline.
Excellent. Now, part of that education is obviously, you touched on this in the first couple minutes of our interview here, that part of that is the education that you guys have provided at Live Action, and part of that is the undercover journalism that you did. You were one of the first folks, I believe, probably the first group to really dig into that and get down there. And obviously, since then, you talk in the book about David Daleiden and the Center for Medical Progress. We speak about James O'Keefe, who obviously, he was schooled by Andrew Breitbart, and they got into that with Acorn. And so it kind of just brought about this new wave of undercover investigative journalism. Now, of course, in the years since, and if you want to talk about that experience, please do, but in the years since, we've seen, James O'Keefe is suddenly public enemy number one of the media, of the Democrat complex, and of the left. Suddenly, this has, fallen out of favor. Obviously, it's always been a bit controversial, but it has just, people don't want to do it anymore. And you talk even in the book about folks in our movement saying that this is not the way to go about things. How do you respond to those folks, and what is the importance of digging down and getting those undercover moments, those things that you're not going to get when people put on the PR show?
Sure. Well, there's a lot going on there, because first of all, investigative reporting has been done for, in some ways, centuries. And before Live Action did it, and ongoing in many ways, there's a group called Life Dynamics, a pro-life organization, and Mark Kutcher out of Texas, who did amazing investigative work. It didn't get much press, but they were doing amazing stuff. So I think there's multiple things at play. I mean, when we've done investigative reporting, Live Action, there were some, particularly some leaders in the pro-life movement who said undercover work is immoral. It's like, wait a second. The FBI, the CIA, reporters across the country and the world, and the police, your local police department is doing undercover work. So are they immoral too? Haven't heard you say that before. But I ultimately, I think what they're upset about, they meaning the far left abortion industry, is what is being exposed, because we're exposing sexual abuse cover-up at abortion clinics, misinformation to women, medical malpractice, sexism, sex selective abortions, and these pro-women, clinics, they're working to kill a baby girl just because she's a girl. We've documented infanticide in abortion clinics. I mean, they're already committing infanticide by abortion. I consider abortion infanticide, but they admit to also leaving infants to die if they survive an abortion attempt. So I don't expect to be popular, with them or, my ideological opponents when doing these exposés, but the goal is to force cultural change. And the big goal, I talk about this in the chapter called Pivot and Fighting for Life. The big goal is to change hearts and minds. And sometimes undercover work is not the way to do that. There's other ways to do that. And Live Action spends a lot of time working on educational programs and videos and content that reaches people who aren't already with us, so that they can have the opportunity to be educated on abortion and see it in a new light.
And shifting gears a little bit to kind of the state of the movement as a whole right now. I saw an article in the Catholic News Agency put out about a week ago, and they were talking about how there's been, an unprecedented number of pro-life bills introduced and passed this year. 536 pro-life bills have been introduced in 46 states, and 61 pro-life bills have been passed. Now, do you think that's a good sign? Do you think we're moving in the right direction here? Or do you think, one of our pro-life coworkers here basically just said, a lot of these bills, because they get struck down in federal courts because of Planned Parenthood versus Casey and Roe v. Wade, because of that, a lot of the time these bills are just sort of setting us up for a future we don't necessarily have. So, do you think we're heading in the right direction with all these state laws getting passed, or do you think, we're kind of just going to be bracing for impact here until, finally we do something about Roe v. Wade?
Well, listen, William Wilberforce, when the activist in Great Britain, when he was working to abolish the slave trade back in the 18th century, he spent decades sending bills and passing bills and getting them struck down to try to abolish the slave trade. But he kept trying because he was building momentum. He was building the case. And I absolutely applaud the 500 plus, nearly 600 state level pro-life bills and the dozens that have passed, because eventually we're going to get that next Supreme Court ruling. And I think it's going to be a much better one than any of the ones we've had. And the right bill is going to land on their desks, and they're going to accept it, and they're going to hear it out. And then I think we will see a change at the Supreme Court level. But we got to keep the grassroots mobilization growing. We have to keep the momentum going. And most importantly, the Supreme Court and the federal government needs to hear the will of the people. Do I like to see pro-life bills at the state level that are total abolition of abortion? Yes, those are the best ones. Some states have done that, and other states, I think, should do that. But you're signaling to the Supreme Court, this is where the country is increasingly at. And, our end game is total legal protection. So there's two ways to do that. Number one, you get a constitutional amendment to our Constitution. And in order to do that, you need states to ratify that. And you need this political power and unity at the state level who would pass, a 100% pro-life bill. Or you get the Supreme Court to undo the damage of Roe and its precedents and the cases afterwards, and to make a new ruling that acknowledges that preborn children are persons already and protected under the 14th Amendment, because it promises equal protection, that no state shall deprive anyone of their right to life. And that would de facto mean that states have to protect the lives of all the persons equally in their state, including preborn lives. So I think the grassroots work at the state level is awesome, and it shows the revolution that's happening. And I think it's a matter of time in our path on the way to abolish abortion until we accomplish it.
Do you think we're moving in the right direction? Like, it seemed for a while that, the Democrats have been, were successful for several years of just kind of slowly changing the narrative of like, okay, legal but rare. Oh no, you need to have it, whenever and however you want it. Do you think we're starting to kind of see the pushback? We're starting to pull back from kind of those extremes?
I mean, I think the pro-abortion side, I mean, it was Hillary Clinton that said safe, legal, and rare is what abortion should be. Now, Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate and now running for New York City governor or mayor, he said something like abortion's tragic and we should protect children. We should love children, but woman has a right to choose. He was lambasted for that by the left. They were just like, how dare you? And then he came out and he said, I'm so sorry. I'm 100% for reproductive justice. So yeah, I mean, their position is innately unstable and extreme. To say that abortion should be legal through all 9 months and taxpayer funded, I mean, this is what the Biden administration wants. Joe Biden even used to be against taxpayer funding for abortion when he was VP for Obama. Wow. Now he's changed. He's even more extreme. This is out of touch with the majority of Americans. Even the majority of Democrats want abortion restrictions. They want abortion restrictions, and yet their own party refuses to do that. They don't want any abortion restrictions. So listen, this is typically how it goes. Most people want to be somewhere in the middle because it feels safe. Right? They don't want to like ruffle feathers. They want to be normal. They don't want to, break the institutions. But the more people that recognize the injustice in the institutions and are educated, the more they'll say, yes, we have to radically change our abortion regime in America. And that change is happening. We just talked about it at the state level. And so I'm very hopeful that we're going to see polling continue to shift on abortion. And even if people don't admit outright that they're 100% pro-life because it's a little scary, the more we do our job at the legislative level, at the cultural level, those are the people that are going to be tacitly approving the new pro-life America as we begin to enact it.
And I think you were going to talk to the fact that, sometimes people are playing it a little too safe on our
Oh
side.
my goodness, big time. I mean, I'm honestly incredibly encouraged to hear someone so deep down in the movement actually say that they have that much hope for some change and some serious policy-related change, because in our short lives, I think we've seen far too much from conservatives talking a huge game.
Yes.
We're going to go to Washington with the Tea Party and we're going to defund Planned Parenthood. Donald Trump is going to go to the White House and he's going to defund Planned Parenthood. And these Republicans, they talk that huge game, and for some reason they get there and they are just too scared of the media, too scared of their constituents who they are not in touch with, to actually see some real fortified change. You speak about that a little bit in the book. I'm wondering, can you give our audience a little bit of what you've seen from the lawmakers and legislators on our side, some of that cowardice, and how are we as folks in the movement who are not policymakers, how are we supposed to influence those policymakers to actually represent the will of the people, not just their own interests?
That's a really good question. I talk about this in multiple chapters as far as tactics as activists. And one of those chapters is focus, doggedly demanding your political objective, even when your political allies are scared, and continuing to, hold their feet to the fire. Yes, there have been a lot of disappointments in the last 10 years politically on abortion, but there also have been unprecedented victories. So we're definitely moving the right direction. I mean, before I started pro-life work, nobody had even touched Planned Parenthood funding at the state level or at the federal level. After doing investigative reporting and starting that, 10 states defunded Planned Parenthood. And then there was a bipartisan majority vote in the House of Representatives for the first time in history, in Planned Parenthood history, in our history, to defund Planned Parenthood of all their taxpayer dollars. Then President Trump did something unprecedented, and he actually defunded Title X, a particular funding mechanism for Planned Parenthood. Yeah. So while we didn't finish the job under Trump, Planned Parenthood actually ended up getting more money through Medicaid, so that's another story. There were unprecedented strides forward. And so we have to celebrate those wins while demanding a lot more. And I do talk in the book about how I was, in one political meeting and I'm the activist, giving this presentation. And it was at the time the chief of staff for the Speaker of the House, Republican. And we were demanding, don't put Planned Parenthood funding in the budget. The House holds the purse strings. They send the budget for the government to the Senate to approve it, which then goes to the president. But they get to decide what goes in that budget. And so we were saying as activists and advocates, just saying, like, don't do it. Do not put abortion facilities, prohibit them in the budget from funding. Why are they getting money under a Republican Congress? And the chief of staff, for this, or one of the top folks for this Republican politician said, you can't ask us to do this because, Obama will shut down the government and then it will be on the front page of Politico that the Republicans did this. And I remember just thinking, okay, first of all, who in America reads Politico anyways, and the media is crazy, always has been. You're hired to do the job, do your job. If I took my cue as an activist and as a nonprofit leader and as a boss, if I took my cue from what Politico does or the Washington Post or the New York Times, I would be the most inadequate leader ever, right? So if you're a leader, you lead. And that means doing what's unpopular because it's right for the sake of others. And so I think there are some more politicians, more and more like that. We got to work at it. But ultimately, bottom line is this: the politics won't change until people change. Mm-hmm. And people change when we are willing to change and get out there and be part of the change by helping educate and change the hearts and minds of the people around us. Politics is this yo-yo, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, who's next? I hope Governor DeSantis, 2024, whatever, President DeSantis then, but it keeps yo-yoing at the federal level. We're building the groundswell so that when it yo-yos the right direction, it stays there and it's all the way there. And that's ultimately what the cultural change we're working towards can accomplish.
I'm so glad you said that as we begin to wrap up here. Seems like we kind of always get to this point at the end of our discussions. We like to say here at the Western Journal, obviously we have a conservative bent, but this is an unabashedly Christian organization first and foremost. Something that I absolutely loved from the end of this book was that you talked about how having a family, having a life, loving your neighbor as yourself, loving God, and loving your family members is the real act of rebellion. It's something C.S. Lewis talked about in the Screwtape Letters and in Mere Christianity, the idea that Christians are, it's not just this mundane day-to-day religious movement. We live behind enemy lines and we are, fighting a fight. And I think it's so unique to hear this take that, having a traditional family and loving your family right is an act of rebellion against the way that the culture is moving. Can you just speak to that at all and kind of get in there and wrap us up with that? I think that's a very hopeful message.
I'd love to. So I got married 2.5 years ago, and I'd spent my 20s, fighting the pro-life fight, and I'm still in the fight till we win it, of course. But becoming a mom, becoming a wife, is my greatest cause. It's part of how I'm a daughter of God and I follow Christ. It's the way I love my family. And, I hope that we can be a light to other families and help serve and love the families in our community. And so my message is to anybody, the ultimate message of Fighting for Life, my book, is this: we are entrusted with people, our families. Maybe they are adopted family members, or maybe, we're a single person, but we serve our biological family or adopted family or just other families in our community. But we're made to be in relationship with each other and to serve one another and love each other. And that's ultimately how you change the world. That's ultimately how you change culture. And politics is ultimately supposed to serve the family. It's supposed to serve marriage. It's supposed to serve the future, which are our children. So if we focus first on that, then we're unstoppable. And that's ultimately I think the deep message of our faith is loving to the point of sacrifice the people we've been entrusted with.
Excellent. Folks at home, that's been Lila Rose, the founder and president of Live Action, the author of the newly released Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. Thank you so much for being with us today, Lila. For the viewers
Thanks
at home,
for having me.
For the viewers at home, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 2 p.m. And 5 p.m. Pacific and Eastern, respectively. I just did the George thing where I messed up the times. 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific.
There you go.
We are here. You can find us anywhere where your audio podcasts or audio shows, audio content is found. That's Spotify, iHeart, YouTube, all of those places. Yep. If you want to support the Western Journal, you can go to westernjournal.com/join, and you can find us there. You can subscribe. You can be part of our mission to equip you guys, our readers, our viewers, with the truth. You can support our journalistic efforts, and you can go to youtube.com/WJLive, and you can subscribe and hit the bell to make sure that you see us go live every single time. Thank you again for watching.